It started as a televised panel meant to showcase differing views on race policy and the future of American leadership, with Candace Owens and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett both invited. The stage was set for a passionate debate. The energy in the room was electric, with viewers around the world tuning in as two of the most talked-about voices of their generation prepared to speak, but tension built fast the moment Candace took her seat. Her body language was defensive, her tone was sharp, and she wasted no time launching into a monologue about victim culture and so-called race hustlers. Her eyes locked on Jasmine. Candace said, "I am tired of people like Jasmine Crockett pretending to speak for Black Americans while actually profiting." Off pain, she paused for effect, hoping for applause, but the crowd fell uncomfortably quiet. Jasmine remained still, her lips pressed in a line that hinted at amusement more than offense. Candace continued, "They dress it up in activism, but it is all performance, and those of us who actually challenge the system are called sellouts." Jasmine finally turned toward her microphone and replied calmly, "If you think truth is a performance, maybe you have only ever seen it from the audience." The room stirred. As Jasmine sat forward, her voice measured and unwavering, "Let me tell you what performance is. Performance is claiming to speak for Black America while dismissing the lived experience of the communities you profit from. Performance is building platforms by invalidating the pain of others, then pretending you are the only honest one in the room." The audience reacted with an audible mix of gasps and applause. Candace shifted uncomfortably, but Jasmine wasn't done. "You do not get to erase people's truth just because it does not align with your brand." Candace attempted to strike back with a smile, saying, "It's always the same script: anger, victimhood, and blame." "But what have you actually done besides talk?" Jasmine nodded slowly, then said, "Let me show you what I have done." And she pulled out a folder full of legislation, community grant approvals, and policy memos. "I talk because I have receipts to match my words. You confuse volume with value and branding with bravery, but the people I serve know the difference, and that is who I answer to. Not a podcast, and certainly not a performance dressed up as provocation." Silence swept the room as Jasmine opened the folder and began to read the names of families helped by her housing initiatives, communities impacted by her justice reforms, and students whose schools received funding because of her advocacy. "You call this talking? I call it delivering," she said, without raising her voice. Once Candace blinked rapidly, her prepared lines clearly faltering under the weight of Jasmine's reality. Jasmine concluded her list, then looked at Candace and said, "What you call victimhood is just someone telling a truth that makes you uncomfortable." Candace leaned into her microphone with a more serious tone, saying, "I don't believe in identity politics, I believe in accountability." Jasmine responded, "Whoa. So do I. But accountability without empathy is just cruelty in a better suit. What you call truth often sounds like permission for systems to remain unjust because you think struggle must be earned to be valid. I don't believe in victim Olympics, but I do believe in calling out the referees who have their thumbs on the scale. Your denial does not make injustice. It's less real, it just makes it easier to ignore until it knocks on your door." At this point, the audience erupted in applause, not because Jasmine had shouted, not because she had attacked, but because she had laid truth down like bricks, building her argument one fact at a time. Candace tried to pivot to personal freedom, but Jasmine gently interrupted.
"But let us not pretend freedom is equal when access is not. People cannot pull themselves up by bootstraps. They were never given, and when those of us in power refuse to name that gap,
we become complicit in its continuation. That is not victimhood. That is visibility, and some people fear it because it cannot be debated." Only acknowledged journalists in the front row typed feverishly as the exchange became the highlight of the night, trending online within minutes. Hashtags like "Crockett Speaks Truth" and "Candace Cornered" began circulating. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, composed her tone, never once breaking into rage. Instead, she had mastered the art of using precision. As power, Candace Owens, who had come prepared with zingers now, found herself wrestling with silence. She tried to redirect by mocking. Jasmine's tone is overly polished, but Jasmine smiled and said, "Confidence without cruelty is not Polish. It is peace, and not everyone is comfortable when peace enters the room." Jasmine then looked to the audience and said, "We keep having these debates like truth is a brand and pain is a product, but I am not here to market identity. I am here to make sure the systems that failed our ancestors do not keep failing our children, and if calling that out makes me controversial, then maybe." Controversy is overdue, her words echoed like a sermon, not because they preached, but because they reached the audience. Snapped to attention, nodding, clapping, and realizing they were witnessing not a fight, but a redefinition of presence under pressure. Candace finally said, "Well, I guess we just see the world differently." Jasmine responded, "That is fine, but the difference between us is I fight to expand freedom while you fight to explain why others don't deserve it. And those are not the same thing. You speak to be provocative. I speak to be protective. Protective of those who do not have platforms or panels or primetime interviews, and that difference is not political, it is moral, and I will always choose the side of those whose voices are usually ignored, even when it costs." The applause people began rising to their feet, some with tears in their eyes, some clapping in silence. Jasmine had turned a confrontation into a masterclass. She never once raised her voice, yet commanded the entire room. Candace sat still, lips tight, fingers fidgeting. Jasmine had not attacked her character, she had exposed her contradiction, and there is no retort for someone who holds up your reflection and simply lets others see it too. The moderator attempted to wrap up the session, but murmurs in the crowd made it clear this moment had become larger than any debate or format could contain. The days following the event were filled with commentary. Political shows analyzed every second of the exchange, and most agreed Jasmine Crockett had reshaped the rules of engagement. She had not come to play defense. She had come with documents, impact, and purpose, and she had used each with surgical clarity. Social media lit up with praise, especially from young women of color, who saw in her not just representation but strategy, not just presence but power. Activists began quoting her lines, and students started using her replies in debate tournaments and speeches across the country. Jasmine stayed humble, posting only a simple message afterward: "I speak when silence protects the wrong people, and I lead even when the light is too bright." That quote alone was shared thousands of times within hours and became the unofficial mantra for a growing movement of people seeking leaders who do not perform outrage but practice integrity. Candace Owens, meanwhile, released a video claiming she had been misunderstood, but had failed to gain traction against the momentum Jasmine had sparked, because truth delivered with clarity often cannot be undone by revision or spin. Panelists and journalists began referring to Jasmine's response as a blueprint on how to handle hostile confrontation with facts rather than fury. She had shown how to make a point without making an enemy, and how to defend dignity without sacrificing depth. Her voice carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it was rooted. Her lived experience became her evidence, and her evidence became irrefutable. Not even Candace's loudest critiques could unseat what Jasmine had grounded in data and reality, and people were hungry for that kind of leadership more than ever. Jasmine was later invited to speak at universities, policy summits, and leadership forums, not because she went viral, but because she brought something many had forgotten to expect from elected officials: coherence, courage, and calm. She talked about the exchange only when asked, and never gloating. She would say, "That night wasn't about me versus her. It was about truth versus tactics and truth. One, because I didn't flinch and I didn't fold." Her ability to recenter the conversation away from drama and back to purpose became her legacy from that night forward. Young activists began organizing around her message, creating toolkits for civic engagement that included clips from the debate notes on how to debate with respect and how to speak without compromise. Jasmine had become more than a representative. She had become a symbol of what it looks like when preparation meets poise and when presence meets principle. Her quotes were printed on posters, her speeches shared in classrooms, her style of leadership studied by those who had long given up on finding real ones in halls of power. She had reignited belief in clarity as a political tool. Candace Owens continued with her usual schedule, but something had shifted. Her critiques felt flatter, her rhetoric less effective, because once someone is measured against calm truth, no amount of volume can make up the difference. Jasmine had not silenced her opponent. She had elevated the conversation so far above it that the contrast spoke for itself. People began asking not just what Jasmine said, but how she said it. and why that style struck so deeply with people tired of endless bickering and desperate for real solutions and meaningful leadership months. Later, Jasmine was asked if she had anticipated the moment blowing up. She replied honestly, "No. I just refuse to let someone else define my value on a public stage. I do not debate for the sake of the crowd.